You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you hungry chicken-eating son of a bitch.
Oh, man, we're going to talk about Chick-fil-A today, and I'm so excited. It's going to be hard for me to focus on anything you have to say, which I'm sure our listeners are going to
absolutely
very insightful. Very insightful. It is a management conversation, but the fact that you're talking about Chick-fil-A will have me thinking of this sweet nectar of that fried chicken that I love so much. How many times a week do you eat at Chick-fil-A, first off?
I probably eat there 3 times a year.
Whoa! So I'm at least 5 times a week eating Chick-fil-A, and there are times where it's closer to 7. It could be breakfast, lunch, dinner. My kids eat it. That's the majority of their diet is Chick-fil-A. I love it so freaking much. But taking us back a little bit, so this conversation, we're talking about the CEO of Chick-fil-A, who Frank had the pleasure of seeing at a conference. So you, Frankie, went to a Tony Robbins conference just this past week, and this was one of his business mastery. What is it, a 3-day or 5-day?
So why don't I just talk about it? So Tony Robbins does all kinds of stuff, but he has access to incredible things. I have been struggling with a decision in my life. It's a serious decision. I get paid a significant amount of money to be a consultant with a mastermind group. And one of the things I've really struggled with is this is the place where I come to get inputs. And if I stop getting inputs, can I get away from, will I die on the vine? And, I'm not the humblest of human beings, but that's the most honest thing I can say is I'm humbled by the fact that I don't know if I can do this alone. And I'm scared if I was to quit this organization, if I'll get good inputs. So what I did is I went to the top of the food chain and I went to Tony Robbins. I've been a Tony Robbins guy. I've read a bunch of his stuff. I've gone to his seminars before. This particular seminar is called Business Mastery, and I'll give you an overview of it. It's fascinating. So it's 5 days, and this maniac doesn't start at like 10 o'clock in the morning. It starts at like noon. We were in there till 2 o'clock in the morning twice, past midnight 2 other times. Like it was 5 days. Like at 8:30 on the last day, I'm like, all right, I'm done. If I wasn't able to get it in the past 5 days, I'm going to sleep. I'm exhausted. I got to go home. I got 2 young kids. I'm not going back beat up. But the thing that he does that's incredible is everybody loves Tony Robbins because everybody, like, you've been exposed to this guy in some way, and his reach is insane. So over the course of 5 days, there was a lot of him. There was a lot of people he's trained, and then he had outsiders. He's had CEOs from different companies, marketing people, all kinds of different stuff. But when this one happened, this was on Sunday mid-afternoon.
I got to stop because anyone listening just needs to know what does one ticket cost? What did you pay for this 5-day?
So to put this in perspective for you, Ian, he like during the pandemic, everything was shut down. He bought a warehouse and turned it into a world-class like studio. 800 people in the studio at $14,000 per person. 3,000 people online at $10,000 a piece.
Ooh, the online people paid 10 grand for not even being there.
Yeah.
And they're just, how engaged are they? Is it so much better to be
insane? I'll show you a picture offline. I'll text you one. He's got this stage is insane, but so this is like, to put this in perspective, Hugh, for 5 days, this isn't net by any stretch. $35 million. I've done the math like 7 times. $35 million. And they didn't serve Chick-fil-A. They served non-grill fried stuff. It was like $100 to $150 a day to just feed yourself because they had like a food vendor. Like it was probably like a $40 million type of an event for 5 days.
Oh, he doesn't even feed you. You paid for your own food at this event.
And your own hotel, your own airfare, everything.
So this whole thing probably cost you $15,000, $16,000, flight, hotels.
More. I didn't book it until like 8 days before. I got an Airbnb. I mean, I 18,000.
Okay.
But here's why. I've got tons. I got 30 pages of notes. And if anybody who's good at anything stands on the shoulders of others. Mm-hmm. And what was incredible about this event is Tony's insanely great. smart, understands things, and has transferable skills that work inside of my business. But the access he has is insane. So this is the one that I knew that Ian would be the most excited about, because I know Ian is a super user of Chick-fil-A. So to put this in perspective for you, when Ian's dad died, we were in Detroit and I was trying to do something nice. And I was like, can I go to Chick-fil-A and buy a ton of stuff? Because they needed to get back to the house. So like literally I spent like $200 on Chick-fil-A. But I'll say this that I think is fascinating. Like Ian just sat there and just ate the chicken, and we were kind of sitting around the kitchen island talking about his old man.
Like popcorn.
Having popcorn. Oh, it was great. But in a world where customer service is absolutely non-existent, Chick-fil-A and American Express are the two places where I'm yet to be disappointed. And I think it's fascinating because both of them put an incredible focus on the customer, which I want to get to in a second. So let me go through a couple.
Frankie, even if we don't get to Chick-fil-A on this, I think this is important to stay on this. You spent $18,000 on yourself. That's an investment.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that people in big companies do. And I think it's important to just talk about it for a second, because I went through the same thing you did. You work for a Fortune 500 company, you work for a big company, and you have mentors everywhere. You have good role models.
And training.
The CEO, the president, the senior vice president, your peers are very talented. You're just surrounded by talent that you can use as sounding boards, ask for their advice, dig in. You have people that are just generally coaching you. There's amazing training. And then you go start your own business and you lose all of that. You can't call them anymore because you left the company. They don't even know how to coach you, because what made them successful in a big company is not going to make you successful starting your own business. How, when you left a big company, how quickly did you start seeking out new voices, new mentors, new coaches? Because I know who your coaches were before. They couldn't help you. I just know for a fact your mentors at MVR were not going to help you start Cava companies because they've never done it.
I think it was about three or so years later, and I made some mistakes. I remember I wrote a guy a $50,000 check. I told Ian about it, and he goes, "Oh my God, you were just frauded. Like this guy just ripped you off. Like like we talked about, like, get your money back and do something to get your money back." But what came out of that dipshit that I paid $50,000 for, is a charlatan, was he had a relationship with the guy who runs the mastermind group I've been a part of for 10 years. And this mastermind has been really, really good to me. And what I can tell you is this: I had small successes in business, but until I started to invest in myself through a mastermind group and through a network, that's when I had real success, because I had real people who were doing what I was doing that I could bounce things off of. And it's significantly different than any of the other things that I had.
So I'll share a story I had from this, because you encouraged me to do this. At first, I thought this was stupid.
Yeah.
I don't need a business coach. I don't need a life coach.
Yep.
But I was trying to build a management program, and I didn't know anyone who had ever done that before. I didn't know how to start. I didn't know what to do. And I started talking with one of your friends, Jay Connor, who you had introduced me to, and he had a business coach. I started talking to her, and I paid her, I forgot what it was, maybe $5,000 for 6 months of coaching. And I got a little bit out of it, but not a lot. But what I did get out of it is she put me, similar to what your situation was. I didn't spend $50,000, but I kind of wasted $5,000 where I didn't get a lot. She put me in touch with somebody who was incredibly successful at selling programs. So this is when I started talking to Gary Blair, who's a guy that has he makes millions of dollars a year selling a goal video program. And I got in touch with him, and I initially started to want to partner with him, but then I realized I was so far away from having a program. And I asked him, what would it take, for you to coach me? And it was like 10 grand for 6 coaching sessions. And it was like 1 hour, not a lot of prep on his part. He did some prep. He brought some things to show me, but it was a chance for me to just, all I wanted was, please turn back the curtain and tell me how you built that video program. Frankie, that $10,000, I've made so many multiples back on that from spending. I remember at the time thinking, I can't believe I'm going to cut a check for 10 grand. I made fun
You
of Frank
told
for
you,
doing this.
you told me about it in
I
real
was-
time. You and I talked about it.
I was disappointed in myself. I can't believe I cut him a check. Am I desperate? What am I doing? Frank, it's the best money I ever spent by investing it back in myself. And I know you do a lot of that kind of stuff yourself, but I've made multiples back. I would have not known how to build my video program that's turned into a live management coaching program. I wouldn't have had any of it if I wouldn't have stroked that check. So I wanted to just stop by. If you're thinking Frank is nuts for spending $18,000, I guarantee you there are 2 or 3 things he took away from this course that will make him that money back within a year.
So this is, you want to just go all in on this and we'll talk about
I think we just
CEO?
talk about Tony Robbins and we do the Chick-fil-A thing later.
Cool. So I don't disagree with you. So let me, I'm going to tell you some cool. So Beth Groner, sometimes listener, one of my managers years ago, she got us invited to a Tony Robbins event in the year 2000, and it was called Results 2000. So back then, this is 23 years ago, Tony Robbins was 40. He was still Tony Robbins, but he didn't have the audience he has now. So what he did back then, he told us this story at Business Mastery, but this is fascinating. He used to go into an arena with 14, 15,000 people there. It was the Verizon Center, MCI Center, where the hell it was called, DC at the time. And everybody who came was like either a super big celebrity or someone local. So there was like a news anchor from local. There was the former Redskins cornerback, Darryl Green spoke. He had Jane Pauley. He had Norman Schwarzkopf. He had all these people up there. And then in between them, he would do exercises and talk to you. And the last person that came was Trump. And like Trump was like 6 hours late. And Tony Robbins like kind of said, he's not here yet. He's got a big deal. Come back. He'll be on at this time. And like we wrapped up at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember driving home in the middle of the night. But what was interesting about this event is I went and talked to some people about it. And like 3 years later, my uncle went to an event. And then in 2004, I went to an event. And he kind of gets in your head. And this is the first time I ever spent money on this. Do you remember from Snowball, Ian, what Warren Buffett talks about investing, but he talked about something that was so important with your spouse. Do you remember what he said?
I mean, he talked a lot about spouse. I think it was, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what you're
He
going.
talked about support, like really just about support and about like fiscal responsibility. Like he in his world, he's like, I couldn't be married to somebody who, if I made $1, would go out and spend $1.10. But the support and allowing me to do the things. So this was something that happened at this event that I texted my wife. And I just said, thanks for not like worrying about what I'm doing and letting me have a chance to really sit back and learn. In 2004, when I was at the event, I was with someone else and it was a very different experience. But what he does that's fascinating, Ian, is this. He gets you to take ownership of things that are fucked up and things that you want, and he forces you to confront them. And at this particular event, there was 2 really cool stories. First of all, I found out about it from my uncle who went. So like a year later, I did the same event. He has you do this thing for mindset. He teaches you how to get your mindset right. And on the first night of a 5-night event, he has you walk across hot coals. And of the people who've done this in like over history, like less than 0.5% of people ever get hurt. But this is the part of the story that's really cool. He teaches you how to do this. You get your mantra. He tells you to do this thing where you do your move. You get all fired up and you go, cool moss, cool moss, cool moss. And you walk across fucking charcoal briquettes.
Did you do it this time? Did you do it this time?
This wasn't at this event. This is in 2004.
2004, you did it with Beth Groner. Did she do it?
No. She was at the 2000 event. She wasn't at this
Okay.
one. This one on my own. But Beth introduced me. But this is what's fascinating. And I looked
Frank
around.
is a Tony Robbins power user for sure.
For sure. Yeah, like you are a power user of Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
So I get to the other side of the fire and I look around. I'm all fired up. But I'm in a bit of a adrenaline junkie, if you know me. So I decide to just get back in line and do it a second time. So I did it twice.
That's amazing.
It was awesome.
And it didn't hurt at all? It didn't hurt at all?
I mean, no, but it's no, but it's I don't know if it's mindset or what, but it was a pretty cool experience. But at this event, like I've never told you this story. At this event, one of the things he had you do is he had you write down he had you write a letter to yourself. And there were some components to the letter. And there was like 4 or 5 things in the letter. Some of them were pretty personal, but there were 2 of them that I'll share here. This is 04. I hated my job. I hated it. I wanted to quit. In the episode we did on the head coaching candidate for the Lions, we talked about like leaving at the right time. I wasn't ready to leave, but I wanted to leave. And I wrote down what I wanted in a business. I wanted to own real estate. I had no idea I'd own what I have now, but I wrote that to myself. And I was in the wrong relationship. And I knew this in 2004, and I wrote that. And I got that letter 6 months later, mailed to me. And I still have that letter in my drawer, 10 feet to my right, because what he made me do is he made me write out goals, and he made me do really specific thinking about what I wanted. And I have those.
Wait, you gave him the letter and he set it up so you didn't get it for 5 years?
6 months.
Oh, 6 months you got it.
Came in the mail 6 months later.
As a reminder of this is what you told yourself. How you doing?
That's it. So like I can go into a little bit more of this. I'll tell one other story. I'll kind of come back to the surface level. We can kind of summarize this. I also went to an event in 06 and I followed up with an event in 09. One was called Wealth Mastery in 2006 and one was Business Mastery in 2009. And why are these relevant? 06, it was 05, it was 05. The market was starting to melt down. The people he brought into that market talked about other meltdowns. And at that point in time, I still worked at NVR. I knew about downturns, but I didn't know specifically about downturns the way that I do now. And that was the moment that awakened in me the need, want, and desire to understand cycles. But I remember I was in contract conversations with a realtor in the Outer Banks to buy a speculative second house that I would have bought 100% on debt. And this is in 2005. And that thing went through the floor. It was probably worth 25% of what it was going for. And there was just something in me. Like I was kind of toggling back and forth on buying it. It was like $1 million home, which at the time was nuts for me. And I'm like, oh, everybody's making money on it. But I went to that event and they talked about cycles. And I'm like, I'm going to sit this one out. And I like literally, I had a contract in my inbox that I almost signed, and I went to that event and it convinced me not to. In 09, I was skiing. If you remember, when I quit my job, I went skiing for like a month. I got a phone call from someone on their sales floor, and he goes, hey, Tony's coming out. The market's going to hell. We're doing another event. And this is the last event I've gone to since this most recent one. And this is one where he brought in like 30 thinkers. This is the one where he brought Gary Vee in when nobody knew who the hell Gary Vee was. He brought in Tony Hsieh.
You had me buy his book. You had me buy his book right afterward.
So the point of it is this. You need access to things you don't have.
Was Tim Ferriss at that one?
Ferriss was not.
He was not? Okay.
No, but there was, the lineup is enormous. Jay Abraham, Chet Holmes, the lineup was just bonkers. And what it taught me was this.
Chet Holmes was long since deceased.
Correct. But he was like, but
his daughter runs it now.
That's right. So he wrote a book called, for those of you who don't know, it's called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And it was a really good book. And it's just a great book. How to do things, have discipline, essentially. But I think the reason you wanted to go over this, Ian, is this. You need to find inputs that are outside of your business or are a little bit different than what you do that allow you to think, to grow, and to nurture yourself. And we spend money on employees here through training. I mean, for a company of our size, we spend a fair amount. I mean, we've hired Ian for the second time to run us through a training program. We do training because it's critical. But if you own a business and you're not seeking learning, you will become stale. So I'll leave you with this, and then you can just ask some questions. One of the things Tony Robbins said that I took away from this weekend was this. I'll give you two. First one is this. The CEO, he's now the chairman of Chick-fil-A. His name is Daniel Truitt Cathy. 3 names. The dude was like a lightweight wrestler. He's 70-something years old. He still wears a badge. He's worth $7 billion. He wears a badge, and on the bottom of his badge, it says trainee. He goes, I'm learning every day. But the thing that he said to me that I thought, or he said to the group that I thought was just incredible was this. You can't scale bad DNA. So if something doesn't have the right components, you can't scale it. And he told an incredible story about they had 3 stores in South Africa, and he kind of giggled. He goes, listen to this, Ian, this is great. He goes, sales weren't there. He goes, labor cost. Labor cost was good because I mean it's like almost like labor cost right after the Civil War. It's really low, but they didn't have the sales, and they were supposed to open 40 stores. And he goes, we had 3 and we just killed it. We had to stop it because it had bad DNA. We didn't want to scale it.
No one wanted fried chicken there.
That's right. I think they wanted fried chicken. They just didn't have the money.
They couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford it.
That's right. The second side of it was this, and this is kind of Tony's big takeaway, which I thought was fascinating. There's tons of them, but this is one. If you do what they do in your business and you do it great, you will have exponential growth. And this is the whole reason I think you asked me to talk about this. But if you do what they do in other businesses that they don't do in your business, and you adapt it for your business and you become great at it, that is when you can have geometric growth. And that was my takeaway. I've got like 15 little bullet points like that. And there's some specific stuff behind that I'm going to kind of lean into over the months. And the 18,000 I spent, I think I'll make it back in a month, if not a couple of weeks. And I think I can grow it because of just a few small tweaks. And it's the reason we read. It's the reason you and I do this. It's kind of fun, but at the same time, we kind of push each other to think a little bit different. And it's the reason you have to have inputs in your brain that make you think differently, because no growth happens without a purposeful mission to kind of seek something new.
And I think, we're doing a podcast and you can learn from podcasts. And I learn so much from podcasts all the time. I pick very specific ones that I've done. I've told you a million times how I learned about commercial real estate through podcasts, just listening to hundreds of hours, and that led to me learning how to go put together a fundraise, a capital raise, but there's only so much you can get from that without that live coaching component. It's I learned this from you. I learned this, go invest in yourself and cut big checks. Because if you try to spend cheap by just buying books, and if you don't get that live coaching component, you get what you pay for. That's why David and I went and I spent $12,000 to fly out to see Gary Vaynerchuk. We spent $10,000 for 2 hours with Shaquille O'Neal. Those things are all, you take things away from it. Literally, we still talk about those conversations today in Keep. I can tell you, I started with Jason Drone, my marketing guy. That started with coaching. I paid for a little bit of coaching, and I ended up saying, can I just hire you to do all of my SEO? And man, he's been worth the money so many ways of putting my video program on a platform. It's made me more efficient. If I'd have tried to do that myself by reading books and listening to podcasts, Frank, never. But you have to cut some big checks. You have to, people won't think twice about cutting a check for a car or, for a second home or, something, a vacation. They won't think twice about paying $10,000 for a vacation for themselves. But how many people cut a check that big to go to a conference or to pay for a live coach or consultant to come in and work with their team or work with themselves to get better? I think a big part of your success is the fact that you're just always looking for mentors and coaches and new ideas and input. So I give you kudos, because that I did not have that before you. I was all self-taught. I was all read books, soak up what I could from mentors in my company, but I never cut big checks to invest in myself. It was always little nibble here, all self-learning. I picked that up from you, and it's been a big part of my success as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I don't think we need to belabor the point. That's kind of it. It's the takeaway of this. There's 2 of them for me. Me personally, I would never be where I am if I hadn't made some of these decisions to go. And every good thing that I have in my life, NVR was different, and it was a really good thing. But post NVR has come from a belief and an investment in myself. And those are the only 2 places they came from, and a shitload of work. And that's kind of it. So that's it for me.
How much direct interaction did you have with Tony Robbins? I'm just curious.
like direct interaction, zero. But he was in the room.
Oh, does
like,
he
I
ever
didn't
call
want-
on? Does he ever call on you? Did you ever raise your hand and you have a microphone and you say, "Here's something I'm going"? Like I know he does that at his events all the time, where he'll just call someone out and
It was probably 30. So it's incredible what he does with technology. And he did it for like, it's the most efficiently run Zoom meeting you've ever seen. He's got producers like out the wazoo. And like, I'm gonna text you a picture. You're not gonna believe what it looks like.
more
But
efficient than let me speak to a manager.
sadly,
Production value higher. Okay, well, that's shocking.
but I didn't speak to him directly, but this was part of it. And this is knowing yourself. I knew that if I took that here, I would be distracted. When I tell you that I had a very distracted week last week, I was talking to Ian this morning about some things that I learned last week. I had a very distracting week. Had I been home, it probably would have been a no-go. I wouldn't have gone. But I physically picked up and moved out of town for a few days, left my wife and my kids without me and my business. And I checked in. I got a hotel, or I got an Airbnb, and I said, I'm going to be here. And I was there. I took a few phone breaks and I had a few things that kind of crept in.
And you were off the grid. You weren't texting me. You weren't responding to anything. You literally turned that phone off and just locked in. I know that. Normally I get like 24 texts from Frank in a day. I was getting nothing for days. It was I could tell you were locked in.
And that's the important thing, that you got to do that. So
probably
that's
worth
it.
the $18,000 to just not have to interact with me for an entire week. That's probably almost worth it.
So if you're a fan of the episode, I'll let Ian do the sell, but I'll tell you this. If you invest in yourself, every dollar you spend will be returned, I would think, exponentially or geometrically. And it has been the case for me.
I also, just the last one, Frankie, is there an extra motivation when you cut a check to go take action? Because it's one thing when someone gives you some free advice and you hear it and you're like, okay, I know for me, when I cut a check for someone for coaching, I want a return. I'm like, I'm going to look at everything. I'm going to pay attention. And the more I spend, the more action I take.
So the check helps, but with our billable rate, I'm out for 5 days. I owe my wife like the sacrifice that I had to make in my business and at home to do this. Like, there's absolutely no chance I'm not doing things with it. But that's the leverage.
Yeah, Ellie's stuck at
you have
home
to
with
get
2
over yourself.
toddlers. You know, like she's grinding just as hard as you are for the week because you're off learning.
Yeah, and I came home and I said, I'm tired. She rolled her eyes at me, but I'm like, I better do something with this. The money is part of it, but the time and the commitment is the other part.
I love it. I love it. So follow my boy Frankie if you want to be wildly successful, just like Frank. Invest in yourself and keep investing in yourself by listening to this podcast, because it is mind-blowing, career-changing, and will alter your mood in such a positive way that you won't even know what to do with yourself. Give us a 5-star review, knuckleheads, if you haven't, and write some nice comments about us. If you haven't subscribed and you're new to us, what are you waiting for? Frankie, great hanging out with you, homie.
Hey, the story of Chick-fil-A is fascinating. I'll tell
That's
you.
coming. That's coming. We're going to dive into that. It's coming.
See you, brother.
Peace.